And welcome back to Washington Commanders Insider. Today, we're talking about the latest trade rumors around Brian Robinson Jr. We're also going to be talking about the key players and matchups to look for in tonight's game against the Cincinnati Bengals. And so before we go ahead and we jump into it, I first want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, just like Jaden Daniels is going to be hitting Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Zach Ertz, and many others for multiple touchdowns this upcoming season. And so in exchange for hitting that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Washington Commanders. And so make sure that you hit that like, you hit that subscribe, and you join the Washington Commanders Insider family as we talk nothing but Washington Commanders football. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it. And let's start with the latest update around Brian Robinson Jr. And so if you've not got a chance to see this, head over to NFL.com. I think that this article really gives you a great update as to what is going on with Brian Robinson Jr. and the Commanders. And so just picking this up from the middle of this piece. And so it says that Robinson and the team mutually agreed he wouldn't play as a trade before next week's roster cut downs remain possible. NFL Network insider Mike Garaffolio reported, per sources informed of the situation. And just at this last part, it says that Robinson, who's headed into the final year of his contract, due $3.4 million in base salary, rushed for 799 yards and 8 touchdowns on 187 carries last season. He's a grinder who can churn out yards and move a pile, but with a career 4.1 yards per carry average, Robinson 26 lacks burst and big plays are sparse. All right, guys. And so with that update, I think that there's 3 things that really come to mind in this situation. And so I think that the first thing that is really telling to me in this particular report is that you see that it's mutual. Okay. And so when you see that mutually that they've agreed that he wouldn't play, I think that that's very telling, because coming into this particular game, we know that Jaden Daniels is going to get some reps today. You know that there's going to be the first teamers out there. You've heard Cliff Kingsbury say it in the pressers or the presser that he wanted to get, players out there and start getting them to gel and, get the communication and everything right, because, the time is running down. We're 3 weeks out from the first game of the season. And so when Brian Robinson Jr., who's slated in as your RB1, is not playing tonight, I think that is something that is telling, and especially when it comes down to a mutual thing. And so I think that that's point number 1 out of this. And then number 2, when looking at this situation, I just think back and just, if, because right now, it seems like something's going to happen. And clearly nothing's happened just yet. I mean, this could just be a whole bunch of noise, but I just find it interesting when you start there with mutual. But I think of just what happened a long time ago between the running back position when a change was made, in training camp. And I think about what happened with Adrian Peterson and Antonio Gibson. And so, Adrian Peterson, when he was ultimately replaced by Antonio Gibson, he was coming off a pretty productive year there. So, I mean, this is a guy that with his 2 seasons with us, he had over 1,000 in 2018, and then he was coming off an 898 season. He had 7 touchdowns, and he had 5 there in 2019. And then he was ultimately replaced by Antonio Gibson. And so remember the circumstances, if you go back and take a look at that, with Antonio Gibson coming in, Antonio Gibson was a guy coming out of Memphis, and he was, just supposed to be just this dynamic running back that could just pretty much do it all, because he was, I think, a wide receiver out of Memphis. He had shown flashes as a running back as well. And I just think that, the Commanders ultimately went ahead and pivoted off of Adrian Peterson, because when you look at just what type of runner that Antonio Gibson just really came in as, it just opens up your offense, right? Because he can go out, he can pass catch. It pretty much looked like he could do all the runs, whether it was just come with power, also to get to the outside and things like that. And so I think that was probably a huge part of the decision. And so I'm saying all that to say this: when you look at a possible move like this late in training camp, I just wonder, are the Commanders thinking of this thing and saying to themselves, like, okay, for what our vision is of the offense this year, do we want to get a little bit more dynamic at the running back position? And so, just like it says there in the report that, as far as Brian Robinson Jr. and just being a guy that is just going to get the breakaway runs and stuff like that, that's just not Brian Robinson Jr. style. He is more like a Derrick Henry. He's more like a LaDainian Tomlinson back in the day. Like, he needs lots of carries and he needs multiple attempts and just trying to wear down a defense for him to just, I think, really be very effective in a game. And I just think that maybe the way the Commanders are trending at the running back position, they're looking for somebody that not only can they do that, but they also have the ability to maybe break away. And they also maybe have more ability to get more 10-yard plus runs and things like that, because that is something that I think Brian Robinson Jr. has struggled with. And I just think that it's interesting when you look at this and the timing. And so, I just think about this when you're looking at just when the Commanders or when the Washington franchise last, made a change like this in training camp. That's one that comes to mind. And so, another thing that really comes to mind, it's just, and I've kind of already covered it again, is what does it ultimately mean? Does this mean now that we will see some more of a Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt? Because I think that when you look at Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt and what he presents, I think that he's a running back that really could be a 3-down type of runner. Now, I know it's just one preseason game, and I know he's shown flashes in practice, but I mean, that's the same thing that I think that Antonio Gibson did as well when he was showing flashes and things like that. Now, I'm definitely more of a believer here in Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt for the long term, but I'm hoping that that is the case if the Washington Commanders are going off and they're looking to trade Brian Robinson Jr. And I just think that if you're looking at it from a trade value situation, I'm not sure that the Washington Commanders are necessarily going to get, a major trade haul for him at this point in time. Now, I do think that maybe the situation does change a little bit after this week, if they're hitting the phones, because, things are just, it's fluid in the NFL because injuries happen. Teams look at the chart that they have at the running back position and go, hey, we don't have enough. We need to get somebody in here. So, I mean, things can definitely change in a week. But I just think that right now, if you're looking for, a good draft capital out of this or what this is going to look like for the Washington Commanders, I think that that's probably going to be the more interesting thing here. But, that is the latest here with Brian Robinson Jr. Again, just talking about just the fact that he is definitely involved in a trade rumor, and it just looks like that something is going to happen, especially when you see that him and the team have mutually agreed that he's not going to play tonight, especially with the starters, I'd say, set to play some snaps here in this preseason game. So we'll find out. And so next, I wanted to go ahead and jump into just some of the players to look for in tonight's game and just some of the matchups and things like that. So I think that the first thing that I'm looking forward to seeing here is just what else is going to happen at the running back position, because I think that Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt is certainly going to get some looks. Does this mean now that we get something here from Chris Rodriguez Jr., Jeremy McNichols, does Austin Eckler play a little bit more of an extended role? And so I'm curious to see what the rotation of the running backs is going to look like tonight. And I just think that, you have got to look at that, because if Brian Robinson Jr., who is your RB1, is not there mutually, I think that the Washington Commanders are going to take a very good look at their running backs tonight. So I think that that is the first thing to kind of circle in on if you're taking a look at this one. And so the next thing that I think that I am just interested in seeing, and I think that a lot of people are looking forward to seeing, is just what is going to happen at the linebacker position. And so I think that Kane Medrano really has a chance to step up here. I think the last time we talked about it, Jordan McGee was not going to be out there. And so let's see what happens going into the game. But I think that when you look at Kane Medrano, he's another guy that has been showing some flashes. And I just think that Joe Witt Jr. is looking for somebody. in the middle of this defense at that linebacker position that is going to be, that versatile player that he can throw out there, and perhaps some 3 linebacker sets and things like that, and kind of turn this defense up a little bit more in the middle of the field. And so can Kane Medrano step up here? We did talk about Duke Riley Jr., who just got signed. He was awfully physical and pretty loud in that, I think, scrimmage that they had. So let's see what happens here in actual game situation if he's able to take a step forward and emerge there. And so the next thing I wanted to look at is just matchups. And so when we're talking about the secondary, which I think has been actually the best part of the defense, and really you see a lot of highlights with what they're doing in practice and such, they get a good test tonight against T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and that's assuming that they are going to play them tonight. And so, I do want to see what we are going to see from Trey Amos. I want to see how he is able to respond, because Jamar Chase is going to let you know if he catches a football on you or he scores a touchdown. Hopefully we don't see that tonight, but I want to see the response here from Trey Amos. And then also, too, I want to see what we're going to get from Marshawn Lattimore. I think that this is another important step for him to take a foot forward and see what we're going to see from him. And just really, just depending on what they decide to do with the secondary, I think that one of the things that Dan Quinn said that is, he was like, look, he feels very good about the first 5 corners on this team. And so let's see what happens, how they look in this secondary, because if they do have Joe Burrow out there, they are certainly going to test our secondary. So let's see what we have there. And then lastly, just shifting back, just defensively, I want to see, can this team be a bit more disruptive? All right. And so does that mean, or when we're talking about disruptive, I'm talking about being able to go ahead and not just set the edge, but just really dictate what is going to happen in the run game. Because remember, last week, the Patriots had over 4 yards a carry. And so you certainly need to cut that down. I think that is one of the things that was just, I labeled as a bad habit from last year, whether it's stopping the run or the turnovers. Like, those are things that you just have to stop. And so let's see what this team looks like. Let's see if we also see some of the players that were added over the offseason. And so that means like a Javon Kinlaw. Do we see a little bit more of a Dietrich Wise, Jacob Martin? What is that going to look like? Do we see them early on in some series and things like that? And also, too, do we see some more new wrinkles to this thing? Because remember, there was one practice where I believe it was Dorrance Armstrong, and then it was also, too, Jacob Martin. They were lining up over top of the guards and rushing that way. And so do we see a little bit more perhaps what the rush packages are going to look like, for the team going into the season? And so those are some of the things to watch for in tonight's game against the Cincinnati Bengals. And so we'll be talking post game there, but just circling back, just really to the main lead here. And that is with Brian Robinson Jr. And just the fact that, again, mutually, he is not going to be out there tonight. So you guys let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking about this. So, I'm just going into just another article where I was taking a look at this, and this was on ESPN.com. If you want to read this was John Kahn. And he has an interesting stat there towards the bottom where he says that with Brian Robinson Jr., he's ranked 29th in yards after first contact, and his percentage of 10-yard runs, 9.8, ranked 86. And he said that he's 17th in rushing yards per game at 56.8. He also points out with that 4.1 yards per carry for his career, he ranks 40th amongst running backs since he's entered the league. And so those are just some more stats just to think about here with this Brian Robinson Jr. noise. Do you think that he will get traded? Do you think that he will get cut? Once again, if you want to, read about these stats, you can head over to ESPN.com. This is John Kahn's article there. And then again, if you want to read about just this report from the NFL Insider, saying that it was a mutual agreement on tonight, him not playing, you can go over to NFL.com and you can read this. And so you guys let me know what you're thinking there. And then let me know what you're thinking with the key takeaways here, because I've circled the running backs. I think that this is certainly going to be really an emphasis going into tonight. And going back to another thing that Cliff Kingsbury said, that he was like, look, I feel like that all these running backs can play in the league. Like, all of them can play right now in the league. And so that's just talking about how competitive this group is. And I'll say this, and just how important that it's going to be. I think that for this team, they need to find a every down back that they trust, that can really run this offense, that can run the up tempo, that can give you the pass catching ability, that can run with the power, that can run outside. I think that you're looking for somebody that gives you a little bit more of like a Saquon Barkley type of feel, right? Like a guy that can just do just about everything. And I think that that's where the Washington Commanders are. I certainly hope that they find it, because when I look at the runners just over the past, 10 years or so, I think of a guy that was successful for us. I mean, it just wasn't for very long, but Alfred Morris, like I would love to see that type of production. I wouldn't like to see the Matt Jones type of production. That was just a disaster. For the people out there that follow the team, and so hopefully we don't see some of that stuff, but we actually find a guy that can be an every down runner for us. I think that that's going to be huge. You guys let me know what you're thinking here for the defense. Is it the offensive line that you're looking forward to seeing tonight? Is it just that you want to see this team just clean up things altogether? Because we did talk about that in yesterday's video. Like I was like, I don't care what you're doing out there. If you can't clean up the penalties, you can't cut down the turnovers, you're not going to win at any level at any point in the season. And so that definitely has to be an emphasis tonight. So anyway, you guys enjoy the game. We'll be talking about it after the game. And so as we always say, go Commanders, and I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.